So in the game of sport, I have to tell you, this gentleman who's coming on board now has taught me a lot. He will attempt to give credit to others, as humble in human nature is. Man, if you want to learn something, ladies, if you want to learn something, if you want to experience something, listen closely to these words, because he's lived them. These don't come from a book. This comes from the game of life. It's an honor, Murph, to have you on board, dude. I'm going to turn the show over to you.
Great. No, thank you. No, it's great to be here and to meet everyone virtually and see Chris Bright again. I saw him on the screen here, who was the one who introduced me to you, James Mack. So it's great to see Chris again. And I'm glad you predicted exactly what I was going to say in terms of, I do defer credit to other people because, I still have all my Mac thoughts on my wall that guide me every day. I still have tons of advice that Chris gave me from our YPO group together that guide me every day. So it's I've had a lot of good mentors and teachers.
Well, man, you tell us, as I look at where you are today, if we freeze time or where any of us are today, interesting dynamic for me, Murph, is in the work we do often is we ask people to look at current self, right, future self, where you want to get to. And there's an illusion that from going here to there can be a straight line. But I ask people, well, if you look over your shoulder at history, is that a straight line? And for most of us, it's a squiggly line, right? Maybe with some breaks in the line. Can you share what got you here, a little bit of the story? Where did it all begin and how did you arrive here today?
Yeah, no, it's I don't think it's a coincidence that you asked me to come on the day they talk about failures. I'm sure I'm your friend with the most failures, so I go through some of them right now. Keeping it short, I grew up in Boston, Massachusetts. I went to the University of Notre Dame. I was not an athlete. I got cut from all my teams, unlike Chris Bright, who's a famous athlete here. Still at his age, they still talk about his ball playing. I went to Notre Dame, and then after that, I went to Harvard Law School, and then I became an attorney in Boston at a law firm called Ropes and Gray. I did that from 95 to 99. I got married in 95 to my current wife, Lauren. And I worked at Ropes and Gray for 4 years, really enjoyed it, and thought I'd be a lawyer for the rest of my life. I got a phone call from a famous sports agent in an agency in California, asked me if I wanted to become a sports agent, which is something I always had wanted to do, but had never really thought about how to do it or how to get into that field. So I did the interview and interviewed in August and, did about a 5-6 month interview, got the job. I took a huge pay cut. I had to move across country with my wife, who was then 7 months pregnant. And I went to start what I thought was going to be a dream job and probably my only job for the rest of my life. That was in 1999. 2 years later, we had a 2-year-old daughter, still making about $60,000 a year, living in a backroom apartment, sold a car, driving my bike to work, trying to make it work. And I had 2 years of great experience at the sports agency. I learned a lot, I had done a lot, but it was just a truly awful place to work. There was really no integrity. There was no trust among the partners. They were all suing each other or sleeping with each other, even worse. And it was a bad place. So in 2001, 2 years after I moved my whole life and family to California, I made a decision to start my own agency called Athletes First. And the hope there was to not necessarily create a new agency, but create a family type of experience. One where we really focused on personal relationships and integrity and doing things the right way. So we started that company in 2001, and we left the most powerful agency in the world. And that agency was unhappy with us, and they wanted us back. And so starting 2001, they sued us. They sued everyone who had left. They sued my wife. They sued my father-in-law. They sued the copy guy. They came to my house and said, we're going to pick your financial carcass if you don't come back. It's not the best way to have someone come back. We didn't want to go back. We had enough there. We want to do things the right way. So we said, no, we're not coming back. And then that unleashed about five and a half years of litigation at the state court, the federal court, personal arbitrations, mediations, everything, you name it. The other side spent $18 million trying to to destroy us at this point, although they kept offering us to come back. And over those 5 years, we're a startup company. We had no money to use. We had no investment money or whatnot. So I hired my college roommate and his wife from Cleveland. They moved out here to defend us, and it was a true David and Goliath story. But unfortunately, in this case, um, Goliath won. They destroyed us in court. They had the best lawyers in the country. We lost judgment for $44 million. 20 of it was punitive, which basically means it hardly ever goes away. We had a race to the courthouse to file bankruptcy, and we were able to file bankruptcy before the union. So to be an agent, you have to be certified by the union. And while the union had testified on our behalf throughout the trial and understood that we were the good guys, and the other thing to note during this whole 5-6 years of litigation, our company was booming. And our vision and our integrity and our personal approach was caught fire, and we had all kinds of phenomenal clients and all kinds of success despite the litigation. But once we lost $44 million, we had to file bankruptcy. After we filed bankruptcy, the union who certifies us tried to take away our license to practice, which would have been the end of Athletes First forever, which was absurd because they were our biggest advocates, the day before the trial ended. So we had a hearing whether or not they could take away our license. We argued that the license was protected by the bankruptcy shield. Thank God we won that. And so we were able to continue on in bankruptcy and $44 million in debt. We appealed the case, which we were able to do because we were in bankruptcy. And then we just continued working. And again, we had all kinds of veteran players come over to us. We had all kinds of high draft picks. We had the number one pick in the draft. Like, players in the NFL and come out of college really loved our approach. They loved the fact that we were willing to put the athletes first, that we didn't have huge egos, and we understood that the agents are not the story, they're just the background. So we continued, and we had tons of success. After the $44 million judgment was offered against us, or issued against us, the other side came to our house again, and they brought a check for $15 million. And they said, hey, this all goes away. Everything goes away. You take this $15 million and you come back to work for us, all will be forgiven, because I saw what a great job we were doing. So that was a kind of a big turning point for us. Do we take $15 million? Again, I had at this point stupidly bought a house in Newport Beach, which I had no idea how I was going to afford. And we were, we owed $44 million, and 20 of it was punitive, which means it never goes away. If we don't win this appeal, which we have like a 1 or 2% chance of winning, we also lose our license to practice, and moving back to Boston to do I don't know what, because I wouldn't be able to be a lawyer anymore with that kind of judgment against me. $15 million is a lot of money, a ton of money. So we thought about it, and we really discussed it as a group, and we decided, listen, we've come this far, and we have a philosophy: do the right things with the right people for the right reasons, and things are going to work out right. And of course, all my employees are like, well, we've done that. It's not really working out right yet. I'm like, just have faith, have faith. And so we turned them down, and we continue to go forth. And, given that I'm sitting here with Athletes First shirt on, we obviously, we won the appeal by the grace of God. And the opinion written basically said we did nothing wrong. We were within all of our rights. The trial judge had it completely wrong. So, they remanded for a new trial, a new set of rules. By this time, like 7 years later, the public company in Canada that had been funding all the litigation, they had sold the judgment to a New York company. That New York company had no personal animosity against us. They didn't really understand what was going on. They saw $44 million judgment go away. And we sat down with them, and we ended up settling the case for less than $1 million. So started 2001, about 2008, we settled the case, and we thought the blue skies were ahead, and we just continued to really do well. But then the union came back to us and said they wanted to suspend my two partners for their action that was underlying the conduct underlying the litigation. And we tried to explain that that conduct was complete lies and just fabrications made up by brilliant lawyers. But for some reason at that point, they didn't care, even though the head of the union he was calling us at one point, telling us to suspend my two partners, and on the other hand, asking me to hire his son, who actually still works for me. So very strange mixed messages. We decided after 7 years we weren't going to fight anymore, and my partners both took 18-month suspensions. And that was supposed to be the end of Athletes First because they were the two, bigger names in terms of representing the athletes. And so all the buzzards circled, and all the other agents came in and tried to get our clients. And again, we didn't lose a single client. We just ended up gaining more clients. Their suspensions ended. So now it's been about 9 years, so 2010. And finally, we had all the burdens off our back, and we were able to move forward and do what we intended to do when we started off in 2001. Since that time, the last 10 years, we have really thrived as an agency. We've become probably the most successful football agency, and by football, for all of us who aren't in America right now, I mean NFL football. We become the largest, most successful football agency in our country. Our major competitor is CAA, Creative Artists Agencies, which is a huge conglomerate for whom I have a lot of respect. But they've gone out and bought. They were number one. They went out and bought number 3, 4, 5. So it was us against numbers 1, 3, 4, and 5. But we kept battling. And this past year in the draft, we set all the records for the most successful draft out of any agency. And as Mac mentioned, we were able to open up a new company in New York, and that company works with brands and entities. For example, our first client is the NBPA, so we work with all 450 NBA players, monetizing their likeness and their image. About 5 years ago, we did do a transaction with Dentsu out of Japan, thanks to the Uberoth family. My friend Joe Uberoth was close to the Dentsu family. His dad, Peter Uberoth, who ran the '84 LA Olympics, and obviously was a commissioner of baseball. He was close with Dentsu. Dentsu was looking to expand in North America, have a presence here. They met with all the major sports agencies, didn't like any of them or wasn't a good fit. And the Uberoths thought we would be a good fit because of our focus on personal service and integrity, and always putting the athletes first, always putting the client first. So 5 years ago, we sold a third of our company to them, and that's been extremely helpful. And they've allowed us to expand internationally. And so, yeah, that's where we sit today.
Man, a lot to unpack there, brother. So let me ask you, Murph. Great overview, highlights. As I mentioned it earlier, and from the outside looking in, right, and everything you described, wow, it sounds glamorous and sexy. Even though you push past that stuff, you're amongst these amazing people in life and continue to grow. And it's got to be a lot of fun. And I would share what my observations have been is, you were on a personal first name basis with many airline pilots, right, as in the work goes, and there's a lot of things that maybe we don't see in terms of recruiting, right? Can you talk a little bit about maybe the misunderstanding about the business, and probably instructive for all of us is there's a level of grind that goes to any business, right? And what are the sort of the core principles of what it takes to do that? I'm sure it applies to all the businesses that are involved in this conversation. What's the grind?
Yeah, I mean, it was, especially during those 8, 9 years of litigation where, my legal team was my college roommate and his wife, who were both brilliant lawyers, but there's two of them compared to 30 on the other side. So, I had to wear my my assistant general counsel hat, and then also my CEO hat, and then also be a football agent as well. And so trying to do 3 full-time jobs for about 8 years. And again, part of the story was, we moved to Southern California where we didn't know anyone at the time. We were fortunate to meet people like Chris and Mac, who really helped us out a lot. But we have 2 young kids, and as Mac and Chris know, my professional obstacles were nothing compared to my personal obstacles in life. So the battling with all that, and it's just a nonstop grind. And a lot of sacrifices have to be made, but at the same time, the athletes first. The one thing that we always say is that families are really first. And we have to put our families first. So, I coached my daughters in soccer. That was, as Max says, that was a non-negotiable for 20 seasons. And Certainly didn't miss any birthdays or anything like that. So there were certain non-negotiables, but other than that, it was on the road all the time, traveling all the time, and just working harder than I ever thought I could.
Yeah, and somehow it doesn't always get the press clips, right, of what's required, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, I think there's a lot of a couple movies and shows about being a sports agency. Like Jerry Maguire, where Tom Cruise is obviously very sexy, and uh, you know, I forget the other one that was on TV for a long time with Ari. And then there's Ballers now with The Rock. But yeah, I mean, the reality is that our industry, it can be sexy, right? Like for example, we were consultants for Playboy for a long time, where we were in charge of bringing athletes to every Playboy event across the country, across the world. So that was pretty sexy. Because of who we represent, we have access to, as I'm sure all of you do, to all the best clubs and bars and restaurants in all the greatest cities, whether it's New York or Vegas or Miami. We get to hang out with big name athletes and their Hollywood celebrities. So there's a sexy component to it for sure. But the reality is, when we set up Athletes First, we set it up to be anti-sexy, which was I think we all looked in the mirror and were like, okay, the sexy thing is not going to work for us. We got to come up with another approach. And so we went with the opposite of sexy in some ways, which is family. And I think our approach, you hit it on the head earlier, Mac, in terms of being authentic and being honest. Like that we have to be who we are, and we're not sexy people, but we are sexy in terms of being family oriented, in terms of doing the right thing, having the right values, and always being there for athletes, always putting them first. And so the term sexy has a lot of different definitions. If I had to define it, I think it's pretty sexy to always be putting our athletes first, always being putting our clients first, and having 2, 3, 400 clients trust us for every part of their life and every decision they make. I think and that's the only way we'll be sexy.
Well, man, it comes back to that big word, trust, right? And that's it. Take your lifetime to build it and a day to lose it, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, and it's a great example. We started the company in 2001, so our first draft class was 2002, and so it was a first draft class, and we had a great class. We had Joey Harrington, quarterback from um, Oregon, who had been on the billboard in New York, was a candidate for the Heisman Trophy. Like, he's a huge, huge top 10 quarterback, a huge signing. And then about a month before the draft, the number one pick in the draft, the draft was a month away, but everyone knew the Houston Texans were taking David Carr. That was it. It was a done deal. And David Carr fired his agent, and his business manager called us and asked us if we'd be willing to represent David Carr. And so that's like that's a huge blessing. First year, first draft, we have the number one pick in the draft. So, but before we said yes, we went and we talked to Joey Harrington. And we said, Joey, listen, he's going to be the first pick in the draft. You're going to be like the 9th or 10th pick of the draft. There's no conflict. You guys are friends. And this is huge for Athletes First. Huge. What do you think? And somewhat surprisingly, Joey said he had to think about it. And so he went and he slept on it, came back the next day, and he said, Murph, I hate to say this, and you can do whatever you want. I'm a smart man, I'm a business major. I know what this means, but like, I went with my gut feeling when I chose you guys, even though you had this litigation and you've never been on your own before. And that same gut feeling just tells me I don't feel good about not being your guy. But I understand he's the first pick in the draft, and I understand how important that is. So you do what you want. I support it either way, but I would feel bad if I didn't tell you how I really felt, or if I wasn't authentic. So we met and we're like, man, this is a dilemma. You know what I mean? Like, what are we going to do? And my partner, it's like, well, I feel bad for Joey, but we have to do this. And I'm like, no, Dave, like, we have to put the athletes first, and there's just no question in this case. Like, how do we put Joey first? We don't sign David Carr, right? Saving David Carr puts our company first, but not Joey. And our first major decision like this can't go away from our mission statement. So we ended up turning him down, and he did go number one in the draft, and Joey ended up going number 3, coincidentally. But that was a big test, and Mac, you mentioned trust. It was a big issue on trust, and it's a story that we point to a lot in terms of people can trust us to put the athletes first. But then I also go back to the saying that we do, you do the right things with the right people for the right reasons, and things are going to work out. And sure enough, the next year we represented Carson Palmer out of USC, and he was the number one pick of the draft. So, it just kind of, we didn't know that, and certainly we didn't do it for that reason. But, I think that, clients can trust us to do the right things and to put them first. And I think by doing so, it's going to ultimately benefit us.
Talk about temptation, right? And pushing past it.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, and I have been asked, and I'll throw it out to you. Don't pretend I know the answer. I ask this question often of people to understand who they admire in life and who they'd like to learn more from. The question is, if you had a chance to trade lives for one day with somebody, who would it be? Is there someone in the realm of sport, well, perhaps anywhere, you say, this person's very interesting. I'd like to either be in their cleats or their coaching shoes or whatever shoes they have, because maybe it would be instructive, or I'd learn something more that I couldn't learn being on the outside of them. Anybody you would swap lives with for a day?
I thought about that question, Matt, because I wanted to give you an answer that wasn't no. You know what I mean? But I think it's when you talk about swapping lives for a day, and you talk about if there's an athlete or a coach or whatnot. I mean, they're being a day, spending one day in the life of an athlete, I don't think would be all that great, because it's such a big process. You know what I mean? And they're always working to their next goal, and they're always working towards the next achievement. And same thing with coaching. I don't think a day would be sufficient. But I guess if I had to answer it, like I would certainly trade shoes with Tiger Woods, because I just started golfing three weeks ago, and I like to spend a day golfing and not losing 30, 40 balls, and see what it's like to hit the ball like he does. But in terms of like learning something, I think probably, unfortunately he's passed away, but this is a hypothetical. I go with one of our former clients, Coach Wooden, John Wooden from UCLA. And I think, I've tried to learn all I can from his Pyramids of Success and all of his books and whatnot. And he just had such an amazing ability to build teams, and he won so many championships in a row. And he obviously got the credit for that, but he's never looking for the credit. And you talk about your acronym and like surrounding yourself, the P of sports, surrounding yourself with people. He surrounded himself with great basketball players, but they were great basketball players who bought into his culture. And, they tied their shoes like he asked them to tie their shoes. They sat on the bench like he asked them to sit on the bench. They interacted with adults. I mean, so he basically had influence on every part of their life. And I would love to be able to be Coach Wooden for a day and just really figure out how he was able to convince so many people to buy into his approach. And I think it was a great approach, and he was a great client and a great mentor as well.
Well, man, it's really that's significant, my friend. And if I come back to golf for a moment, if you golf with me, I just make sure I update your insurance policy. I don't know if it might have been Chris Bright who suggested one time when I played, say, "Have you ever thought about throwing the ball?" Be a way to do it.
I know how I feel.
I mean, let me ask you one last question, if you can hang with us. There may be others before we conclude. I want to get.
Sure. Yeah.
Is there, and you may have already described it, Murph, in the journey you were generous enough to share. I have been reminded constantly, right? Some of the greatest lessons come from most significant setbacks. And yet I find I can spend the day trying not to make any mistakes, even though I know they might serve me. Is there a favorite failure? And I mean that, maybe something that's been most instructive to you. And again, you may have described it, but there may be something, a kernel that comes out of that could be helpful to us.
Sure. Yeah. My favorite failure, and this is a tough question, Matt, because there've been so many, as you know, but my favorite failure is actually a part of the story I left out, which was probably 7 years ago now. Casey Wasserman, who owns Wasserman Media Group, he made his third pitch at trying to buy Athletes First. And I was in charge of our negotiation for Athletes First. And it went on for about a year. And once again, he had offered us a lot of money. He offered us, again, a lot's relative. To me, it was a lot of money. He offered us about $40 million for our company. And we got all the way down to a week before our closing dinner. We had the restaurant picked out with the reservations. The lawyers were all doing the documents and whatnot. And I was in the office late, and their Wasserman's main guy called me, and he said, "We're pulling out of the deal." And this is after a year of work and, a year of really solving a lot of problems. As anyone who's done a deal knows, like all kinds of problems come up and we solved all of them. And his name's Mike. And I said, Michael, can I ask why? I mean, can I ask why? And he's like, Murph, like, you're just not into this. You don't want this. And, Mac and Chris both know I'm probably too honest to a fault, and I don't really hide how I feel too well, but well, what do you mean by that? He's like, listen, Athletes First is your baby. It's your creation. It's your family. While we're offering you a lot of money, the questions you've asked about Wasserman, like how are there synergies, or what type, do we have a retreat, or how do we all integrate each other? He's like, the answer to all that is we don't. Wasserman, like, we go and we buy companies, we add their revenues to our revenues, we add their profits to our profits, and we build up the value of our company. So ultimately we can go public or we can flip it. It's a corporate transaction, and we look at you guys as a corporate transaction. And you're the one who runs the whole company, although my partner at the time was getting most of the money. And if you're not into it, then it's not going to work. And so he's pulling out. And so I tried my hardest at the time, because I was really, advocating for my partner, who was going to get, probably $20-25 million dollars. But he was absolutely right. I hated this whole thing. I got up there, and I have all the respect in the world for Casey Wasserman, but I asked him what, Wasserman Media Group, like what that name meant to him, what it signified. And he said, well, it's my name. It's my name and kind of what we do, which was such a terrible answer. I mean, it's a factually correct answer, but wasn't what I was looking for. So, I mean, so that deal failed, Mac. But, again, I think and this happened to me a lot, which is why I don't have any other wealth of you or Chris, but like, there's been a lot of times in my life that, I've been offered a lot of money, and it would have made life a lot easier, but it just wasn't what I wanted to do. It wasn't what I was passionate about. I didn't feel like it wasn't doing the right thing for the right reasons. Right. It was just so I could be rich. And, I have nothing against being rich, and I'd like to get there someday, but I just said that was my favorite failure, because how we sold it, they would have bought the whole company. I would have done a 7-year employment contract, and I would have lived up to my obligations and my responsibilities. I would have done the best job I could, but it wouldn't have been for the right reasons, So that was my best failure, and the lesson I learned from that, again, same like when we turned down the $15 million check, and there's been several other offers we've turned down, is that it's just, life is not all about the money. Money makes life a lot easier, especially when you have a lot of personal issues going on. But it's not all about the money. You have to be passionate about what you do. And then when you create a life philosophy of do the right things to the right people for the right reasons, like, you can't just do that when it's easy. You can't just do that when people are looking. You have to do that, when life is at its darkest moments. And as you said, I've had a lot of dark moments, and that philosophy has guided me through.
And thank you. I mean, I can't thank you enough for the words you gave, gifts that have multiplied here. Man, if you can stay with us a little bit, we could do some gift exchange here with Chris.
Yeah, no, love to.